Jay, such a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you. Same here.
One of the finest and amongst the youngest of MPs in India.
Not so young anymore, but I'll take the first compliment.
So you see India in a different light than your predecessors who are still, in the government or outside the government or senior seasoned politicians. So I thought, off the bat, let me ask you, when you look at the opportunity India presents to the world in terms of pure human resource and its young population, where do you see the strengths?
Well, I'm clearly the glass half full kind of person, and I see enormous opportunity in India. We shouldn't lose sight of the challenges. We have many challenges, but I believe the opportunities far outweigh the challenges in terms of our demographics. If we can harness the demographic strengths that we have today, the next generation could be India's story. In terms of the opportunities that we have economically, in terms of the opportunity that we have to play a bigger role for a safer world, I think many other countries look forward to India doing that, and so I am a complete optimist.
When it comes to younger population, obviously there's energy, excitement, there's this new buzzword called startup nation. Obviously there are role models like the Paytms and the Flipkarts of the world, but not everybody could be the Flipkart, but that's good inspiration. So when every other government, or should I say all the governments in all the states are trying to ape each other and compete with each other to being the startup state, not all solutions are going to come out of startups. So how much of it is real, how much is we have to focus on things beyond startups? So because we need about 10 million, 12 million jobs every year. And you need to go into the lowest denominator of industries and thrive from there up. How do you see this play out?
So you mentioned some of the recent success stories among the startups, but we must recognize that this story goes back a generation. You had startups like Infosys, you had many other IT sector success stories that laid the groundwork for what is happening today. You had the telecom revolution. You had many first generation success stories who have outdone some traditional family businesses which have been around for many generations. So I think we have a great deal of cultural strength for entrepreneurship, which needed to be unleashed, which was being held back in the pre-liberalization era. But you're right, to what extent startups can solve all our problems is indeed debatable. The jobs crisis is not just an India story. It's a global story because the 21st century economy with its automation, with machine learning, is going to require fewer human jobs. So even when we have a pretty decent growth rate, we are not creating enough jobs. So 8% growth rate, which is what we should aspire to in India as a minimum, I think, will not create the same number of jobs as 8% used to in the 1990s. So there are many creative ways to look at it. Some people are suggesting a universal basic income. Among policymakers, among politicians, I was the first one to raise this issue, and I keep raising it in India. I think we need to discuss it. I think we should encourage the startup environment because you never know where the next startup will come that can provide millions of employment. It could be a tourism disruption that creates a heck of a lot of new jobs. It could be something else. We should not underestimate the power of startups to transform India's economy.
I think point well taken. Now next comes the policy. Obviously every government comes and they try to do some productive policies. It's a hit and miss. When you see, because you're a parliamentarian, policies are really key, and a lot of people who have gone from here in the last 15 years, both as investors and as entrepreneurs, have not been very happy. It's about 50-50, like you said, glass is half full, half empty. But now there's more money pouring in, but policy has still been a problem. So where do you think collectively the parliamentarians or the policymakers can come to solve at least this problem, which is not political?
Again, let me give you the glass half full perspective. When we became independent in 1947, we were a poor nation of 300 million people, overwhelmingly poor and with low literacy. In the first nearly half a century, we didn't focus so much on our economic issues, unlike our Asian neighbors, some of whom have become first world. we did focus on creating democracy. And we are today not only the world's largest, but also a very respected democracy that many other countries look up to. But in the last now nearly 30 years, we have been focusing on reviving the economy, of making it grow faster. And while we have many policy challenges because of the accumulated issues, we are having success stories one after the other. You look at, for instance, airports. We used to have terrible infrastructure just a decade ago. But in the last decade, today you have some of the world's best airports in India. We are very rapidly increasing the number of airports and making flights available to rural India. That's going to help transform rural India and India as a whole. Similarly, we have challenges in many sectors, and our system of governance, which is democratic in a very diverse country, means that we don't have the bandwidth to deal with all our problems at the same time. But if we deal with enough of these sectors and get them up to world-class standards, then what's going to happen is, let's take medical. We were here to discuss medical issues, and we have a challenge at the primary level for hundreds of millions of rural Indians to have health access. At the same time, at the high end, you have world-class medical facilities where even Americans and people from other developed nations come and get treated. So once we get enough of these sectors up to certain global standards, I think there will be a tipping point effect.
Sure.
So that there will be that bandwidth created to deal with all the other remaining issues much faster.
Okay. We are here at UC Berkeley, the liberal bastion of the West, and then we see that there's a sort of a wave of on the right side of the boundary of players coming into the power from USA all the way to India. But regardless whether left or right doesn't really make a difference. The point I'm trying to make here is that in a country like India, which is 5,000 years old civilization, we have been a value-based society throughout. And is it just that because this young generation is seeing the amount of earning that their parents hadn't seen, they're losing the values and focusing purely on capitalism? Or do you think it's the right time to also, while we're educating them about entrepreneurship, about opportunities of innovation, also don't let them forget that values are very important. So you have to be conscious of that.
Well, about this surge of right of center politics, you're right, there is a global surge in many countries, but these things wax and they wane. You've seen them before, you've seen the rise of the left, you've seen, again, corrections. That will go in its own way. Now, in terms of capitalism or not, the fact is we need to have higher growth rates. We need to create more jobs. And socialism didn't deliver that anywhere in the world. Now, about values, yes, unbridled, conspicuous consumption can create that sense of alienation among large numbers of people. It is a known fact that with high growth rate comes greater inequality. Now, to a certain extent, that's okay, but if it becomes very, very disproportionate, it can also create problems. So, values, I think, are not something that you just inherit from history. We have, as you rightly said, thousands of years of legacy, but values are something that constantly need to get updated and reinforced. I think there is much that India can take pride in, but there are things that I think we can improve and reform. It's an ongoing process.
Okay. And finally then, as a politician, young India, would you encourage people to become political leaders, or is space for a very select few?
I spend a lot of time every year speaking to young audiences in colleges and around the country, many other venues, and this question keeps getting asked a lot. And I keep pointing out that I'm an outsider, I didn't come from a political family, and we need to reform politics. I have written extensively about reforming political funding, about reforming parliament's rules. We need to level the playing field. There's much that we can take pride in as the world's largest democracy, but we are far from perfect, and we need to improve this. If you Google my articles, you'll see my views on how I think we can improve. We need to as I said, level the playing field. It's not leveled today. So for a young Indian citizen who wants to get involved in politics, will find the odds stacked against him or her if he or she doesn't have some kind of family connections
Sure.
to politics. Technology is changing some of that. With social media and other technological tools, you can overcome the lack of a generations old family network. But other things such as fundraising, such as having transparent systems of nominating candidates, these need to evolve. So I would say there are, to my young friends, that don't dive in without creating a setup where you are able to pay the bills for yourself. But there is a policy environment that is emerging in India,
Right.
which is overlapping with politics. There are young Indians that are on fellowships, that are working in offices of MPs like my office, working with political parties, maybe for a year or two. Some are getting jobs full-time to do that. And that is an intersection that creates an opportunity to A, shape policy making, and B, have the opportunity to perhaps get directly involved in politics. So that's the path I would suggest for young Indians.
Great. So there is hope.
There is indeed hope.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that very much.